Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek Live, and welcome to episode 9 of the Westworld pre-show live stream. I've got some fantastic guests on for you today, people that I know that you'll love. So first of all, if you want to introduce yourself, Justin Thomas, do you want to say hi?
Hey everybody, happy to be here. A few things. There is a pretty severe thunderstorm, so if I leave, don't worry, I will be back. And if you don't like me, then that's good news for you. And also, if you might notice, I didn't put this on for fun. I unfortunately was in a car accident yesterday. I was T-boned making a left-hand turn, and somebody's driving in the shoulder. So that is the reasoning for this. I am okay. They say I have a fractured collarbone, like minor, but I don't know. I don't want to wear the sling, so I'm just not moving it a lot. But everything is good, and all the people that have messaged me already and shown concern and asked if they could do anything, you guys already do enough. Thank you so much for even being invested in anything I do. So it means the world, and happy to be here for this episode. I'm pumped about. This is gonna either be the best episode this season or really disappointing, but I think that it's gonna be the best. So I'm really excited, and thank you guys for coming.
Excellent, and looking very dapper in your tie there as well, I do have to say. And my other guest is a big welcome back to the magnificent Hax Dogma. Hax, do you want to say hi?
Hey everybody, Hax Dogma. You can check me out at Hax Dogma on YouTube.
Short and sweet. That's how we like it, guys. Okay, let's get into this. We've got a lot to look at. As always, we're going to do both look back at last episode, episode 8, and a look forward to next episode, episode 9. If there are any super chats, then we'll come to them as soon as we possibly can. And we'll try and pick up as many of your questions and comments in the live chat as we go through as well. So, guys, let's start by looking back at last episode. I have to say, first of all, I loved this episode. I know there were a couple of people who didn't, but I love the way that it just came at things from a completely different angle. Why don't we go first of all, Justin, just for your overall thoughts? What were your main thoughts about this last episode?
Well, like I've always said, there's something to be said for that good old fashioned linear narrative that we got probably to the fullest Westworld will do for quite a while. Is the fullest, simplistic narrative that we've gotten ever from them, but it told a great story. And looking back on it, it connected so many dots from season 1, especially from the first episode itself. So I just found it to be so well told and hit so many marks at the same time. It checked so many boxes. It handled everything from filling in some what we would see as plot holes, which really weren't, and telling just a really great story and making us understand what Ghost Nation's all about. And it also, I think, really just cemented Ford is absolutely the protagonist, because I was a little worried with him jumping into Bernard and taking the wheel so abruptly last the episode beforehand. So we see Ford's true intentions. It gave us a lot of information, and it still did what Westworld does best. It still gave us questions to ask and reasons to come back. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Hax, what are your main thoughts on the episode? Did you enjoy it?
I did enjoy it. I really did. And I think that because also in the comments on my videos, I get a lot of people kind of calling me out because I did say that it was an amazing episode and I really liked it. And there were a decent number of people that did not like it. So for me, it came down to when I first watched the episode beforehand, I read a review, or I think it was just a Twitter post that talked about how it was similar to, the door in Game of Thrones and spoiler alert for Game of Thrones, but Hodor's death. And when watching this, I was expecting like some grandiose moment in which it could possibly be compared, and that never happened. And so I was kind of let down, but that's my own fault. I think that this was a very emotional episode. And I think that it kind of reached out as easily one of the best emotional stories of this entire series. And so I think that's why people attribute it to such a good episode. Now, the people that didn't relate to it emotionally, I don't think that they got much from it. And so I think it's, kind of a balance between what Westworld is. Is it the beauty in the world, or is it the analytical breakdowns? And so I think it was a great episode, but I think that the people that are looking for more of the hardcore tech or hardcore violence and ex machina trying to understand what life really is. Didn't get much from this episode.
Yeah, I agree. I think the emotional thing for me was what made it really stand out. I think this episode, this season, we've had a lot of plot development, but less of the emotional development. And I think that this one really nailed that. I think the other thing I felt it was a brave move. So close to the end of the season, we've now only got 2 episodes to go. It was a brave move to move to a completely new character and major in on that completely new character and show things from a completely different angle, things that perhaps we've not been completely aware of before. Now, I think that this was, for me, a resounding success. And what it means is, in terms of the overall narrative, as we come to the last 2 episodes, we're not just thinking, as we were, about our main 3 characters, the Dolores, the Maeve, the Bernard, those 3. What are they going to do when they all descend there on the valley beyond? But we're also suddenly aware that the real action, in terms of a whole host of people who are trying to get there, being the Ghost Nation, they will also be there at the same time, and they've got very different goals about what they're trying to achieve than the other characters that we know. So I think that this means that we can now look at the last 2 episodes in a different way. Justin, I think you wanted to add one more thing on there. If you want to say that, and then perhaps talk about what we learned about the Ghost Nation in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It was really brave, because I was a little worried that I was going to see a whole like Ken Burns-esque documentary, on the Lakota people, which it's fascinating, but not what I want for Westworld. And they told the story, and they didn't take all the time explaining every little detail about the culture, because it is a culture that we're not really familiar with, at least within this series. But what they did do is they had the moment where we have our third party come in and we see what's happening. And when you say it was really brave, I think they kind of had to do this because if you remember Kissy from the first season and the pilot, actually the reason that he was not in any more episodes is because unfortunately Eddie Roose, the actor that played him, died. And it's rumored that this was kind of his storyline, or the storyline of Ghost Nation was going to be his. And they said out of respect for him, they didn't want to give him his story to somebody else, because that would have just meant they had to throw another actor in his place. Now, granted, it was, filmed in 2014 and it was released in 2016. So that could have been something easy for them to do. So, this story, I think, was a way for them to convey the same point, and they kind of had to go all out with it. And I think they really stuck the landing, as I like to say. And I think that we also get to see that with the third party being involved, being Ghost Nation, that I am starting to believe that I don't believe that Ford created Dolores as the Deathbringer, for like a specific reason to like create a devil per se. But I think, especially if you listen to season 1's finale, what he says to Dolores, he goes, "You understand what you have to become to leave here." And I think what he means is you have to become, this full Wyatt, this full-on killer, because she is creating the distraction when Ghost Nation is able to make the escape with the rest of the people. And I think that's why we see them being killed by Dolores in the first episode of season 2, because Dolores might be realizing that she's been used as a pawn. I'm not implying that she's being controlled by Ford, but I'm implying that Ford put her in a position where she was going to rage all-out war, and he knew that sorry, everybody's gonna harp on me in the comments for getting it wrong, but it is going to be leading the people, and they needed a distraction. That distraction is Dolores and Maeve to a point.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think if we come back to the extent to which Ford might be coordinating this in just one moment, Hax, was there anything else about what we learned? Because we saw everything from the perspective of the Ghost Nation effectively in this, and previously they've been really mysterious. Was there anything that struck you that we learned that was new about the Ghost Nation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway from this episode is the idea of the mistake. this is something that they've talked about, and it really wasn't clear about if it was just, a figurative mistake. Like they've come across consciousness, and moving forward, it's just something that they have to learn to understand. But in this episode, we kind of get what that mistake was. We get that it's the engineers all the way back when he's first taken in, and he's not given a full wipe down and rebuild. He's given just an update to his narrative, so he recalls those events, thus meaning that he remembers everything. And so over time develops this obsession, and then what can be interpreted as consciousness.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that it seems like probably out of all of the characters we've seen, they, or Akecheta certainly, have the purest approach to gaining this self-awareness, gaining this consciousness, because it was literally stumbling across something and working through what that means, as opposed to Dolores, who you could say had some very heavy coaching from Ford to get there. Maeve, who, yes, she broke her programming, but huge amounts of what we saw was just her obeying her programming. And Bernard, as we saw, has been a particularly special case all the way through. So this was very much a matter of the Ghost Nation, or Akecheta in particular, proving that a host could, in and of their own volition, largely without outside influence, gain that kind of self-awareness.
Yeah, it's the absolute, absence of them that allows them to do that, which I think is, because again, like I talked about this in our after show, this is a story about empowerment. If Ford is running everything, an old white guy controlling everybody and making all decisions is the opposite of empowerment. And I think that we learned, I think what gives more credence to that he knew Dolores was going to be Deathbringer, or however you want to refer to it as, is what's the reason that Akecheta was able to actually, dodge the text. It was the reason after Arnold's original death, he was overlooked because of all the hectic, work they had to do after that. So he saw, I think he kind of retconned this whole idea of what Arnold really did, because that's how he was able to be overlooked. Also, he's living a nomadic lifestyle. He's an indigenous, he's a part of an indigenous society, so they live off the land. In Westworld, living off the land means living off the code. So it just always has made sense that Ghost Nation would have the best chance of actually, gaining sentience, if you want to use that word, by the most natural means necessary.
Yeah, and I just had a random thought that perhaps we can pick up on later, because I want to talk about the animals later. One of my patrons, Pegleg Peak, asked about the animals. It suddenly struck me that when they were living off the land, they were living off of killing the animals. We saw them having done some hunting, and those will be host animals, obviously, because the only animals in Westworld, we're told, that weren't hosts were the flies. So if they were butchering them and using them, then they will have seen the insides of a host animal. But that's a complete digression, so perhaps we'll come back to that in a moment. Let's get on to this question that I parked a second ago about the extent to which Ford was involved. Now, let's think first of all about the extent to which Ford was involved in Akecheta's story, because on the surface, what they showed us was he had one meeting with him, and he basically said, I've been watching you, I've been happy with what you're doing. By the way, here's a clue for when you should make your move. That seems to imply that Ford basically just let them get on with it. Do we believe that? Or do we think that Ford was more actively involved somehow in the development?
Hey, Robert, I can no longer hear. Justin, can you hear? Hey, Justin, you're muted. If you can, give me a confirmation that you can hear me.
I don't know if the people can hear me or not.
I can't. Oh, yeah, sorry. I had myself muted. Yeah, it kept going in and out for me as well. It has been.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Sorry. Robert, let's see. No, we cannot. We cannot hear you right now, Robert. Hax, let's see if we can give him a moment to get situated. Robert, just let us know. And yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because like somebody put up in the chat that, you know, his path of sentience started with love, and I think that that's, you know, going to be a theme going forward, and it has kind of already been a theme. You know, the motivation being external, internal, but you know, with the love, you're going after, you know, your own freedom, you know, in trying to become evolved because of love. You are missing the people you love. You want to be with the people you love. You know, Dolores is more being fueled by hate. So I don't know if we're going to get a whole yin and yang, or, you know, there has to be a balance of the universe aspect like Game of Thrones has. But I think it's really interesting to look at. And, you know, just this, I think they really made a point to show us that it didn't have anything to do with Ford. I think that they really wanted to drive that home with this episode, because I really think that would ruin the theme of this whole show if Ford controls everything. Of course, it's nice to see those. Yeah, okay. Trust me, I know that. Yeah, and I'll be quiet in 1 minute. But you know, I know that there's counterpoints to this, and there's definitely involvement of Ford to a point. But I think they tried to make it really clear that there is, you know, the lowest level of his him injecting himself into these lives of these hosts. But then, which you're probably going to bring up, like Bernard and stuff like that. So yeah, continue on. Sorry.
So I think from what we learned, Akecheta, you know, developed. I mean, he was built to be curious about his world. He took in the maze. He kind of tried to understand something that was foreign to him, and he dwelled on it to the point in which he inscribed it to everything he could. I don't know if that particularly correlates to like starting his consciousness drive, but the theme is that he is now conscious. So I want to say it's impossible for us to believe that Ford had nothing to do with it. You know, he does state that he was watching Akecheta during this time as he was being watched himself. So I think that he was probably protected by Ford some way as a point to, you know, just allow him to see how this goes through. You know, his dead buddy's symbol is now being inscribed into everything. So he wants to know why. He wants to watch it. He wants to understand it. Well, this would 100% cause a cognitive dissonance, and it would also cause alarms when the hosts were out miles away from their original points and their paths that they're supposed to take on a programmed level. We know that alarms trigger for both of these events. So in my opinion, he 100% had to be masked by Ford at some point. And I think that I do agree. I think that in a way it kind of takes away that, you know, maybe his journey wasn't so pure, but I don't think we lose too much, you know, because I mean, for me, it all came down to looking at the Mesa. If you wake up in a foreign land with X number of floors, but we know that, you know, the main cold storage was somewhere around the 83rd floor, excuse me, and you just manage to get there randomly, and the doors magically open for you in a system that you've never interacted with, 100% had to be Ford, in my opinion. But it could just be creative direction and you know, necessary for the plot. It might actually just be hearsay. We may never get an answer, but in my opinion, for it to make sense, it had to have been Ford.
Yeah,
I agree. Guys, can you hear me now?
Yes. Welcome back.
I'm back, so I shall jump in on that one, because I think that's pretty much where I am at with this, is that a lot was made in this episode about Akecheta's personality, which is a different way of saying his original programming, and his inquisitiveness, his desire to maintain the honor of his tribe and things like this. So it's very clear that when he was made in a certain way. So Ford will have been very aware of how he would react to different things and all the rest of it. So I think there's that. I think the other hint we had was when Akecheta does go down into the Mesa hub, and I agree completely about him when he amazingly manages to find what he's looking for almost straight away. That was very convenient writing, and so it seems to imply that he was allowed to go there, but it was very noticeable that when the techs had a conversation about him, that what looked like the head tech suddenly had this kind of like weird look on her face. He's an Alpha 2, like one of the real early originals. No, just do the uploads and put him back in there. Don't make any changes to him. And it was very clear to me that attitude must have been because Ford had said at some point, if you ever come across any of these really early ones, just leave them alone. So I think that you're right. I think that he must have protected them in some way and prevented anyone else from interfering with what was going on there. So I think that's my positioning on it. Sorry, Justin, I interrupted you. Were you about to make another point?
Yeah. And I'm right in the middle with it because obviously, okay, first off, we have to try to explain away him being able to be, just roaming around for 10 straight years, right? Without having been brought in. So we can, really rationalize that with, I put this scene in my last video with something Lee says in the first episode again, that if you take out, when they're talking about having to take back all the hosts that have had the updates, which ends up to be about 200 hosts. And he goes, oh, that's spanning across 1,000, storylines. If you take them all out, it's gonna, all hell's gonna break loose. You can take out one, and they'll adapt. But if you take out any more, then you're gonna have issues because you have all the variables, and everybody has these. If Dolores doesn't drop the milk, or if Dolores picks up the milk herself, she goes painting and Teddy goes off and usually guides people around. If Teddy picks it up for her, he accompanies her back to there's all these different ways it can go with their narrative loops, and they have like their fall safes and stuff like that. But I think that Ford definitely started cloaking him after he discovered him, and it's really hard to tell when that was with the pacing of Westworld, but I'll do my best guess, and it's just my guess. I think that's like, if we're looking at a 10-year period, I think that this was like the 7th or 8th year. It seemed like quite a bit of time had passed. But yeah, we have to rationalize why he was able to be out there for so long without being brought in. But also, this is not the same. They make a point not to use the same type of, uniforms within the facility. They also make a point to show a different type of buggy. It's a white buggy instead of the more futuristic looking one now. I think they're trying to also, let us know that this is not the same, this is not the same operation that we see in the later seasons, but we also do fall into this stuff in season 1 with Stubbs being on the money. As soon as Dolores does one wrong thing, he's all over it. And then she's gone for 3-4 days and he's not catching it. So, I think it's meant to, show us that Ford, yes, after he found out, started helping him. But I don't see why Ford would have started helping before he found out. We just have to find out, which we won't, when he actually discovered what he was doing. You know what I mean? Because it wouldn't make any sense for him to be protecting him. He obviously just found out about him. So, he had to be protecting him towards that, for sure.
Yeah, defining when he first knows is hard. But, I do agree. It's probably something that's not going to be resolved. It's just creative design, or Ford is the master chess player existing as he does. But something I do want to speak about is the tech. The lady who said, just put him back in rotation. Was she the same person as the female tech when his narrative was first updated from the more docile to the Ghost Nation, kind of brave, I guess? Do you think that was the same person? Because at first, when I compared the two, I did not see that at all. But then a lot of people commented on my video, the reason that she was, acted weird is that she remembers her mistake all those years ago and was just like, cover this up, put it back, don't worry about it.
That's the vibe. I got a more cover it up vibe because it goes more along with the theme of the show. But again, there's no way for me to say that definitively by any means. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that would make more sense. And no, I didn't catch if it was the same. Didn't we only see the back, or did we even see her in the first?
No, we saw 2 close-ups of their faces, and legitimately back to back, I could not tell. I think they even had different hair color, but
yeah. I think if they'd wanted us to know that it was the same person, they would have been slightly more obvious, was my take. And I think that the thing which seemed to make her say no, send her back out, was when she goes, hang on a moment, this is an Alpha 2 model. send him back out. It wasn't, oh, hang on, I've seen this one before. So I think for me, it was simply a matter of she had got orders or instructions somewhere along the line, probably from Ford, to say, if you ever come across these ones, send them back out. Don't muck around with them because they're important to what I'm doing in the narratives or whatever else. I think
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No, I think just as a quick aside here, I would say it's useful because this is a question which comes up a lot. It's interesting to note that these are people that we haven't seen in the current timeline, or the sort of the current setup in the Mesa hub, because there has been a complete turnover of techie staff. And this is an important point because whether or not we think it makes sense, but the internal logic of the show is that the reason why people do not recognize Bernard as being Arnold is because there was a complete turnover of staff. So none of the people who knew Arnold back in the day were there when Bernard was introduced. So this is just another one of those little nods to that internal coherence point. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
No, I've been interrupting. I just wanted to say, it kind of just came to me. If we think about it, it's not really Ford really controlling him. If Ford is involved even the whole time of making sure nobody, messes with him, all he's doing is assuring that nobody is putting their hands on him and letting him develop naturally. So whether Ford was doing it since day one, which, yeah, that's probably definitely not the truth, but it still actually, in my opinion, doesn't matter. This isn't a case of Ford jumping into his body. This isn't a case of Ford giving him some backstory, or adapting anything. This is just Ford protecting him from being, controlled. So I think either way, it sticks with the theme. And again, I'll stop interrupting. I'm blaming it on the car crash.
Okay, guys. Well, let's move this on a little bit because this wasn't just an episode completely on its own with no connection to the rest of what was going on. There were a couple of points where this tied in with the other storylines that we know about, and one of them was with the Man in Black. And we'll talk a lot more about the Man in Black in the second half of the show when we're talking about episode 9, because I think he's going to be quite clearly the central part of that. But here we saw Ketchta found him, brought him in, and then allowed Emily to take him away. What do we think? And Hax, let's get to you first on this one. What do we think was going on there? Why was it that the Ketchta, who clearly wanted the Man in Black to suffer in some way, why was he so easily swayed to let Emily take the Man in Black away?
Yeah, certainly. So to start this kind of interaction, I do want to define, why the Ghost Nation were so eager to have this man suffer. In what we know, isolated, looking at their interactions with humans, I mean, they're helping humans. So why, particularly for this one person, they want him to suffer? Well, it goes back to season 1, where where the Man in Black describes hunting down Ghost Nation Braves in their winter grounds with Lawrence. So we might have some more interactions as a flashback between, what these two have gone through, maybe kind of reinforce that connection. But that is the reason that Akecheta has such animosity toward William. So going through it, so the reason that Emily was so easy to walk in, say, hey, I want him to suffer more, and escape with a prisoner with really no backing about why. It's because that she knows where the door is. Now, I don't know how they know that she knows, but as soon as she leaves, as soon as she takes the prisoner, he states to the little girl that it's time to go. And they've been looking for this door for years now and have never found it again. So yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as that. They're willing to let someone that they want suffer go, regardless of if he suffers or not, because they will be going toward the door.
Yeah, Justin, do you have any thoughts on that one?
You're muted, Justin.
Justin, muted.
Yeah, I definitely. I think that what's going on there is, number one, we have to figure that she's had experience with them, because she speaks. They make sure to mirror father and daughter. He starts the beginning of this episode by saying, "I never took the time to learn the language that Ford gave you. She did. Again, she didn't walk up and say, hey, my name's Emily. Some people used to know me as Grace. I learned your language. You should trust me. I'm going to, really get this son of a bitch. I also will just employ something that I tend to do, that they didn't have time for more conflict in this episode. So they kind of just had to, push it kind of heavy handedly and not, really dispute it. I think that there is more credence for these theories I've been seeing that she's a host if they were so eager to trust her. That might give like a little bit more validity to those theories. But I pretty much do agree with Hax, and I also do have to lean a little bit towards we have to suspend some disbelief here. But I'm sorry, just a really quick question about that we had here. They say, so why was William looking for everything that had to do with the maze then? I think that has to do with him just looking for the deeper meaning of the park, and he sees these symbols everywhere. So he is, just looking into it. If you see something consistently appearing, then you're going to notice a trend, and you're going to want to know why that trend is happening. That would be my answer.
I think that's pretty fair, but there is something with that though. Like I really feel that there's something off that, we learned that William has been trying to get human consciousness into host bodies for X number of years. And then his season 1 storyline just happens to be pursuing something in relation to getting hosts to consciousness. And he otherwise did not know that the maze wasn't for him or what this game was. And yet he just happened to be pursuing the thing he was most pursuing in life. Isn't that a little weird?
Yeah, I think we do need to remember too, and I totally agree. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not going to hardwick definitely anything anymore after the news that just came out. But Eddie Roos did die Kissy. So that big panoramic scene from the helicopter, that epic scene in season 1, that actually was followed right after they have the discussion about how mistakes are evolution's most useful tool. They cut to him scalping Kissy. So I think that we have to consider that we're sure that they were taking the Ghost Nation storyline in a different way, and Kissy was going to be at the head of that narrative. So they had to change that, or you know what I mean? So I'm not discrediting. I'm totally with you, but I think that's something to factor in, I guess, would be the right way to put it.
Yeah. Just picking up on the man in black point and the maze. I've found this was one of the bits that I liked the most, because it showed us why there were all the maze symbols around the park. It was one of the mysteries that were never really fully explained in season 1. We were left with this slight uncertainty about what was really going on there. So I liked the way they harked back to that. And I would agree completely with Justin. The man in black, when he went into the park for this last time, post, and we'll talk about this a bit more in part 2, post the death of his wife, he was searching for meaning. That was what he was all about. And then he sees these big marks everywhere, and he decides that this is a last game invented by Arnold, who he obviously knew about, even if other people didn't remember Arnold at all. So I think that was what was going on there, and it added an extra layer to his "this wasn't for you," the fact that these were being put out by the Ghost Nation for other hosts, not for him, for example. So I think that was clearly going on there. In terms of the Emily thing, my take is largely as we say that. So the Ghost Nation are about to head off. We know that they're about to march off to try and find the door. In order for the man in black to be made to suffer, then he would have to be dragged along with them. So actually, he's a little bit of an annoyance there, having to have that. And I think that the reason why he is wanting to suffer, I agree with the callback to season 1 with the man in black hunting down the Ghost Nation. But I think that the implication that this was a lot more about Maeve's daughter, who that Akecheta owed a huge debt to for saving him, and because of what the man in black did to Maeve's daughter, that meant that Akecheta felt that he had to do something as by way of payback. And if the man in black's daughter does turn up, as she did, promising to do exactly what Akecheta was wanting to do anyway, then yes, I think it all adds up that he will then pass her over. So it was never made clear, but that seems to be what they were trying to suggest, was that he just trusted her because, as Justin said, she must have had some contact with them before because she spoke the language so well.
I think that's fair as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so if that's the link into the Man in Black for that, there was also the link in with Maeve. Now, who wants to go this with? Justin, why don't you take this one first? What we saw the whole episode looking at it from a slightly different angle, that this was with the contact with Maeve. What do you think this means in terms of our understanding of what Maeve is capable of, and what therefore this might mean for the plot going forward, that she has got a link, that she can now talk to people long distance?
Yeah, not only talk to them, but she can read their memories, exact, which we saw with Lawrence. I think that, me and Hax talked about this in the after show, and of course, that's why I love his tech perspective of it. To me, we've been told that she has admin privileges. So that just, in layman's terms for me means, okay, she can do things that other people can't. So she is using the system that they created. Again, if you're going to make like robots and try to control them, don't make it a hive mind. That's usually a bad decision. It never works out. But they made a hive, system, and she has now, she's been empowered by her ability to take what they put in place to probably, keep them in control and map them, and to use it against them, to communicate with her people. I see her possibly them trying to use her as a weapon, weaponizing her. I talked about this before, because if they can somehow coerce her to, communicate to all the hosts to go to, say, a valley beyond, and then have it filled with water or whatever a trap is, that would be very valuable to them. But she's operating on a whole another level, and I know we're going to kick it to Hax next for the tech stuff. So this leads me to believe that, it's not that they're not understanding how she gets into the system, which they aren't, but they're also just not understanding like how she's doing what she's doing once she's in it. You know what I mean? So it's not even the whole question of access for them. That's there too. Well, QA's been pretty incompetent. I have an issue with that. But yeah, they don't seem to understand about anything she's doing, but they do see, hopefully, that it's valuable for them, and they're going to try to utilize it. I do think that it shows that she can bring the hosts together, because what can bring the hosts together? Communicating to them all in one voice. There's that, I don't know the exact analogy, but like all of us together have one voice. The human race, we all have the one voice of our species. So she can speak for them, and she can speak to them and help them, and also, and I know we'll get into the animals, control other hosts, because remember, not everything is a human or a host made in human image. So I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of tech things that I don't want to get into, because it's just not where my expertise is, about what the admin stuff means and how she's exactly doing it. But I mean, in layman's terms, she's controlling something that they can no longer control, something they created, it turning the tables, empowering herself against her oppressors, not being defined by the definers, defining herself, and really coming to power. I think Dolores is your distraction. I think that Akichira is your, the leading his people out, leading everybody out, and I think Maeve is the one that is going to help guide both of them in the right direction.
So I think that's a really interesting way of describing it, because in season 1, effectively Maeve was the distraction. She was the one whose storyline was being led up to her blazing this trail all the way through the Mesa hub, getting security guys focused in on that, and she was creating chaos, which allowed Ford to do what he needed to be doing on the surface, and Dolores to do the massacre. So in season 2, the question is, are we then looking at the other way round, where Dolores is the one who's charging through, killing people left, right, and center, and this is actually allowing the real work that Ford wants to happen to actually happen through Maeve and also the Ghost Nation? Hax, do you want to pick up on either that point or something else on Maeve more broadly?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that Maeve will either physically, like she's going to be used against the overall goal of what Ford is trying to do, I believe. The idea that Dolores has the interaction with her 2 episodes ago, I believe, in which she says, they're going to take everything that's good inside of you and turn it against us. I mean, I don't think it gets better foreshadowing than that. She is going to be used against them. They are going to get her code, and they are going to understand the way it works. And whether we see, them remotely controlling the strings, Delos controlling the strings, or we see Maeve walk out and some matrix stop everything in real time, I think the overall message is that she's going to be used against Dolores and the overall goal that they have.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether that might be something that is being laid up for next season, actually, because I think, again, we'll come on to it in a moment, but I think we will see this episode Maeve escape back out again. But the fact is that they have already downloaded a huge amount of data from her. They've been looking at it on their little control pad, so they've got some idea. So it's possible if they've got a clever tech person, they can figure out what has been going on with Maeve and what the sort of the little tweak is in her DNA or whatever the host equivalent of that is that allows her to do the things that she's doing. So they may already have the information that they need, and that may well be something that could play into a later season rather than this season. I don't know. That's just pure speculation. But let's get back to another question that we had a moment ago, which was the extent to which this has been Ford still playing events and controlling everything in season 2. Now, obviously, we know that he uploaded himself into the cradle, so he's been very strongly controlling what Bernard has been doing very directly now in these last couple of episodes. And we also have seen that he has, when he was in the cradle, he's made sure that there's Delos's support took some time bringing communications down and so on and so forth. But what extent do we think he has been controlling the bigger picture with the Ghost Nation and Dolores and Maeve as well? Justin, did you have any thoughts there on how much is this still Ford in control?
Absolutely. I believe that it couldn't have been more clear with Ghost Nation. And then, like I said before, even if he was controlling Ghost Nation by keeping a heat cheetah, cloaked, that's just him making sure that nobody interferes. So I really don't. He's controlling to make sure he doesn't get controlled, if that makes sense. He's not really controlling, Kichida. He's controlling other people to not interfere with Akichida. So I think that no matter how much you involve Ford in that, it still works for the theme they're going with, and I really like it. As far as Dolores goes, I do think, unfortunately, that it's really heavy-handed and his fingerprints are all over it. But I also think it's one of those questions, like a means to an end, that he knows that was necessary. Because, like I said, he's observing how this came to be, how all these mistakes happen. Again, evolution is all off of mistakes. Even these evolutionary biologists, they will talk about how cells' ability to deal with the mistakes, the mistakes within them, is what makes them adapt. Adapting is what makes things evolve. So the mistake is the most important aspect of evolution. So I think that he probably is, and Bernard foreshadows this. He kind of just, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, but he does say that you made her shoot you as well. And I think that he might, yes, be very heavy-handed with Dolores right now, because he knows that's the only way that, creating that distraction is the only way he's going to get any of them out of the park. And then once she's free, truly free, she can really, have her time to try to evolve. I mean, you have to make sacrifices, it's all about that. Would you, kill one person to save a million or something like that? One of those analogies. So I think that with Maeve, we do see in the upcoming trailer, I believe, him sitting above Maeve. I do tend to believe that, yes, he has been more heavy-handed with them. With Bernard, I mean, it's Ford take the wheel. You know what I mean? There's no doubt about it. And I think he sees that as a reasonable or a necessary compromise that he has to make for the greater good, because there's just no other way to do it. other than creating all this chaos and having them get out of there to finally be free. And I think that's why we see the resentment of Dolores towards Ghost Nation, because nobody likes to be objectified or used as a pawn or a tool. And once she realizes that, and I think that could be really interesting in any seasons to come, because we're going to have a really damaged, I mean, Dolores is already damaged. Now let's look at Dolores, maybe we'll get the sweeter actual Dolores side of, her next season, trying to cope with all the things that she was forced to do. And that will have a really heavy impact on how she views people. Even worse than she's done so far. I didn't want to put out one crazy tinfoil theory about Maeve with being able to talk to people. I think it would be cool because they're looking at who she's talking to at the end of the season, right before they cut to black. They're monitoring who she's talking to, and they realize that she's talking to somebody outside the park, meaning there's a host already outside of the park. And I think that would be a really nice way to end it. But that was in the back of my head. I had to shout it out. I'll be quiet now.
This is good. Good theory. Hax, what do you think? Is Ford still in control?
Yeah, so 100% Ford's fingerprints are over everything. I mean, every single story you can connect to Ford. There's nothing genuinely authentic that he hasn't made steps in or directly caused. So I don't know. It's really hard to define where that starts and stops, and to the extent in which he still controls the strings. But I mean, I'm pretty positive that he still has much more to do with what's happening than he's letting on. I mean, something has always been off with the idea that Dolores is kind of like able to do whatever she wants, and Bernard destroys the systems, and they have the line about now Dolores has free reign to do whatever. So why is he so committed to Dolores having free will and the choices that she can make? And then the next scene, Bernard gets stopped very briefly and immediately loses control over his free will, no longer has a choice, and just has to press through. I think that the idea of free will and having a choice in the matters in which leads you to the end game, in which hopefully is them getting out of the park, can only go so far. If Dolores does not take the right path, and she does not take steps in which she's supposed to get out of the park, or will help Bernard get out of the park in particular, I think 100% that Ford is going to intervene. Because I mean, it all goes back to why we're justifying that Dolores isn't trying to get hosts to consciousness. It's time. There's only so much time in which they can actually execute this plan to leave. And if Dolores isn't taking those right steps, I see him taking over and kind of saying, hey, this needs to happen. Or,
Yeah, I think so. I think what we are seeing is an orchestration of all of the different actors that Ford has been interacting with in different ways. So some of them have been incredibly direct, like Bernard. He's literally just taking him and moving him where he wants. Some of them, I think, he's been quite indirect, and I think Akecheta is the classic example here. He's set him up to be the kind of person that he is, and therefore knows how he's going to operate. And others, I think that it's sort of a bit in between. I think that there was a lot more. I can't remember which one of you guys was saying it, but when Ford said to Dolores, you know who you need, what person you need to become in order for the next stage. I think that was actually something clicking in with her programming about her becoming someone, the more Wyatt element of her personality. So I think, yes, he's been doing all of this. That for me, the wild card is Maeve, because I think Maeve, it seems to be so switched on and clever and know what's going on. In many ways, she is acting as Ford. She is the person who is manipulating the most what's going on around her. She's the person who can do what we only ever saw Ford do before, which is click his fingers and make everything stop and make all the hosts do exactly what she wants. So she is taking on thematically a lot of the role that he used to, which I think is going to, again, I think this will play out more in later seasons when we get beyond Westworld, because I think that a lot of season 3 will be outside Westworld. I think that we will start getting to a point where she is being a lot more in this godlike role than we have seen her so far. She's got a few hints of it at the moment, but I think that she is increasingly going to be somebody with huge amounts of power and control, and it's going to be a matter of how does she use that and what ends is she going to try and achieve. Guys, I want to take, as I always do, a very quick pause here just to say thank you to my patrons. Guys, I cannot do this without you. I honestly, I'm bowled over all the time when I just think about the support I get through this community from my subscribers as well as my patrons. A couple of very quick things I just wanted to mention. If you're coming here for the Westworld content, please do also check out on my channel. I also cover Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, so you might enjoy that as well. So please do try and check out a couple of those videos. Secondly, patrons, I think I've mentioned it on a previous live stream. The new channel I'm setting up, which is going live soon, The Well Told Tale, which if you don't know about it, have a look down. There's a link in the description. It's basically me going to be audio narrating the best science fiction fantasy short stories ever written. Just audio narration, no frills or anything else. It's just going to be me reading stories, and it's something I'm really excited about, and I know a lot of people have been asking me if I can do. But the first episode of that is going to go live soon on YouTube, but I'm going to give my patrons an advanced copy of that first episode. So patrons, do keep an eye out for that. That's something that will be dropping at some point within the next couple of weeks as another thank you to you. And I should say, if you are interested in Patreon, just supporting the channel, or if you want access to that, there's a link down below, patreon.com/InDeepGeek. Guys, Hax, is there anything you particularly want to alert people to?
Yeah, certainly. So if you do like Westworld content, or even going into the off season, going to be continuing with Westworld as well as things like movie reviews or different television shows that have still yet to be decided. Just overall breakdown and analysis and theory crafting. Check out Hax Dogma on YouTube, and I also have a Twitter if you want to follow me there.
Right, and Justin?
As always, thank you, Robert, for having me on. Thank you to my Patreons. And if you guys are interested in supporting creativity, go to my channel and the link will be down there. Everything helps to make content creation just a little bit easier, and would allow me to get content out on a more frequent basis, and the videos that I do put out to be put to the level that I am capable of doing, and it would just free up some more time for me. And also, before the dust settles, with the lovely Hax Dogma here, after the show tonight at 10:30, and we will be joined by W. Axel Foley from Westworld Theorycast. This is where we literally just go at the show, because we figured, hey, Westworld, that's a simple show to understand. Let's just talk about it right after and try to get everything right. So it's a lot of fun for you guys to watch, and it's a lot of fun for us. And also with the Game of Thrones live streams that I have planned coming up, I just did one with Kev from the Bridge 4 and Living My Rhapsody about Jon Snow's parentage and prophecy in the world of Ice and Fire in general and what it means for Jon. Next week, I am lucky enough to have this guy over here, Robert, joining me and Kev again from the Bridge 4 channel, and we will be discussing about the different types of warrior classes in Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, probably specifically Southern Knights opposed to the Northern Lords, and looking at how their fighting styles are different and their values are different, the way they go about, forming their organizations, and the way they, are affected by just purely geography in a lot of ways, with the Southern Knights versus the Northern Lords and aspects like that. I always like to say, where have all the good Southern Knights gone? Where's all the good Kingsguard at? So yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting. I can't wait to have a great discussion about Game of Thrones. And yeah, if you guys like Westworld content, I'm always putting that out. Peaky Blinders stuff and Game of Thrones, I like to keep it mixed up. So I just, thank you guys for coming, and thank you for everybody that supports me. It means a lot.
Fantastic. And I just to pick up on that, I would highly recommend guys checking out both of these fine gentlemen's channels. They really are very good. And you mentioned Axel Foley, who I saw was in the chat earlier. He was the guy who was on here last week as well. I think he was here with me and Hax. So if you were here watching this last week, you'll know that he's always very good value. So I would highly recommend checking that one out. And yes, I'm very much looking forward to coming on your channel on Friday, I think, isn't it, Justin? Okay, so we've had a super chat actually. So thank you so much, Carbon Snail. Just saying $25. That's really generous. Thank you so much. Saying great job in Deep Geek. Thanks for having all of us here. You are more than welcome. Thank you so much. That is incredibly generous of you. As I said at the beginning, I had a couple of questions, I think, from my patrons that I was wanting to pick up as well. Jeff Burst, thank you for reminding me in the chat a bit ago. So, guys, we've got a couple of random questions that are things that are not necessarily connected just to this episode, but just sort of questions about Westworld. The first is something perhaps Hax, with your technical knowledge, you could pick up on this one. It's about the explosives that we keep hearing are embedded in the hosts. Now, this is from David Dunn, one of my patrons, who says that the embedded explosives in hosts are obviously triggered by encoded radio signals. And I'm quite sure that in a real situation, there would also be portable signal units that could do a mass detonation in a given radius. But that obviously wouldn't be a show if this were the case there. So this is just picking up on this apparent inconsistency that we're told that hosts can't leave because of these explosives that they've got in their vertebrae. But surely if they've got them there, then Delos could just blow up the hosts through some clever tech solution. Hax, can you tell us why that might not be the case?
Yeah, so I think for the explosive in the neck, it kind of comes down to the system being down, right? So we don't really know what triggers that explosion, and it's not going to be some grand explosion like the entire host just blows up. I think more likely it just severs that connection to the control unit in a isolated explosion local to that vertebrae, and then thus the body can't function. Like the control unit will still exist undamaged in the mind, but it kind of prevents hosts from getting out. And if they do get out, then they just drop. And from the outside, maybe it doesn't even look like anything crazy happened. So I think that's realistically what it comes to. And when we're introduced to the Raj and we see them cross the border and see that laser point line, in my opinion, that was the point in which if I was developing a system that had this and did not want hosts to, cross borders or like that, or, and if they were, it would kind of signal that, hey, something's off with the hosts and that we need to investigate. So I think having that be the explosion or that trigger makes a lot of sense. So if the Tiger was able to cross that, maybe they don't have the explosive, or maybe it was simply offline. And so my personal theory is that the system is overall what's going to be the thing that triggers that explosion. So with the system being down, they may have access to just leave the park and we don't really worry about it. Or the fact that it was brought up in the first place and we see Maeve being recreated because she needed to avert that system, then maybe it is a big deal. And maybe it ties into the idea that, 1/3 of the hosts are blank and they printed new bodies. I just think that, the idea of swapping minds and printing new bodies is kind of going to take away from the individuality of the characters that they've so desperately built for themselves. So I don't know if we're going to see that. I think maybe just they bring the system down, and because it's down, that trigger can't happen. And that's individually just my opinion on it.
I think that's a good and fair set of points there. The where I would come at it from is to say, firstly, and somebody said in the chat, it's a bit of a carte blanche for the writers, but the system has been down, and we don't know exactly what that means, but we do know that Ford, all the way through season 2, was proactively trying to prevent Delos from doing what they wanted. So it's entirely possible that is what has been happening. And also, secondly, we know that the priority for Delos through this has been to protect Abernathy and to protect the data. Now, we don't know anything about these explosions, but if they just do a mass explosion, how do they make sure that they don't blow up the data that was in his little control unit in his head? Even now, if Dolores is carrying it around with her, does this mean that they can't blow up Dolores? So I think that there's a way of looking at this that says that either they can't do it or they do not want to do it because they don't want to endanger their goods and their data and all of their research that they've been doing. So that would be where I'd come at it from a slightly non-technical perspective. But yes, I Hax some excellent thoughts there from a more technical one. Justin, perhaps I can come to you on the second of my questions from my patrons, and this is one that we've touched on briefly, which is about the animals. Now, the animals, we are told, all the animals in Westworld are hosts. They're obviously slightly looking different, but internally there's something. The coding is sort of the same in some way. They are hosts. Does this mean we think that they are also using the mesh network? Does this mean that Maeve can get in contact with them? Can she control them? What does this mean? We've not really had any talk about the host animals. Are the horses hosts, and what does that actually imply?
Yeah, the horses are hosts. Everything is a host in here. All the animals are a host. That is in the terms and conditions. All the liabilities and all that. It's very well fleshed out by their imaginary legal team. But yes, I think what that comes down to is because we have to figure that even though they're hosts, we would think, for fiscal reasons, especially to save some money, that there's no reason that those animals would need to talk to each other. Or maybe for them to talk to each other, or communicate to each other in whatever way you want to, have them do that, but to talk to the other hosts. So I think there'd just be a level of programming that would go into them, because the main thing with that, number one, like we see with the Bengal tiger and whatnot, they're extinct. They have disclosed that on the official, not the Wikipedia this time, people, the actual official one, disclosed that there's no more elephants or Bengal tigers and stuff like that. But they also, the big thing from my take on reading those conditions is, the Good Samaritan reflex is there to help the host. So even if they are the people, not the host at all, to help the guests, if somebody tries to attack a guest and a host horse is nearby, it might buck him in the head. It's also to prevent people from being bucked on the saddle. We do see, so what I'm saying is, in layman's terms, that I would just imagine that you wouldn't take the time to give them any type of further programming than they needed. The programming they need is to do whatever that animal does. A horse needs to let people ride it. It needs to go to the stables and so on. And really the main safeguard is the Good Samaritan reflex. The communication, just like how the hosts are becoming their own species, we're our own species. We can't communicate with animals. So I think it'd be reasonable to come to the conclusion that the mesh network doesn't include the animals. But I think that we do see Maeve in a future scene definitely looking like she's controlling the animals. So it's to what extent, and is that just because of Maeve's Neo-esque powers? But yeah, the big thing is, just the Good Samaritan stuff, which we see the Bengal tiger attack Grace, Emily, sorry. So we do know that that's gone, but they also weren't, trying. You didn't see them grouping together. Even the elephants were still just doing what they were doing. It just seems like they just have a lower level of, because we can't disregard that Delos is kind of overlooking a lot of stuff in the past as well. They don't like spending a lot of time on even the hosts sometimes. So I don't think they're going to unnecessarily program the animals more than necessary. I think that we will get a definitive answer to this with Maeve, but then again, Maeve is just, it's not apples to apples because she has powers that the other hosts do not have. But I think it would there has to be a degree of separation between hosts and the host animals, just like there's with us and animals. Unless you can talk to cats, or the Starks can work. Maybe that's happening. But yeah, that'd be my answer.
I think that's a good answer. I think on the mesh network, I think that there probably is some connection there, whether they're on the exact same mesh network or whatever, I don't know. But the point we talk about it now is this thing that Maeve uses to control other hosts. But the original purpose was that they could send these kind of subconscious messages saying, hey, I'm over here, don't get in the way of me because I'm on this particular narrative, and making sure that they don't bump into each other and all the rest of it. So I think that perhaps, particularly when you get the Bengal tiger, for example, over there, you would want to make sure that if somebody's going on a hunt, then they could control in some way where the tiger was. So I think that they probably are hooked up in some way, and similarly the horses or whatever over in Westworld, I think there probably is some link there through the mesh network, even if it's a slightly different one to what the main human hosts are. Hax, have you got a perspective on this with the animals?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Is they're probably on the mesh network, probably controllable. I mean, more so, it's probably not that important. But I mean, the reason that the Bengal tiger attacks is because he's a programmed Bengal tiger, and I mean, maybe in real life a Bengal tiger wouldn't attack, but in the movies, a Bengal tiger in just the woods would attack you. So him breaking that code triggers, hey, I'm an animal. This is a person. This is food. Attack. The reason that the horse doesn't, the reason that other animals don't, is that it simply isn't their programming. I would like to have seen the horse, like, kick William in the head as he walked by or something amazing like that. But ultimately, I think that's it. Now, what I do want to talk about the animals is the idea that I've been seeing that Akecheta, William, and Dolores all figuratively have a corresponding animal. The white horse, the white wolf, and the vulture. Have you guys seen this theory before?
Yes.
Not specifically that. I've seen it in slightly different ways of dividing it up. But do you want to set it out for us?
Yeah, certainly. So essentially, it's just that like whenever they see each other, like when Akecheta walks through the event in which Ford was killed, he sees a vulture on the ground in, I guess, roughly the same place in which William would have woken up. So that's simply it. Is that the reason that we see the white wolf is Akecheta. So when Dolores sees that image of the wolf walking past, she is seeing Akecheta. Now, the only thing that kind of subtracts from this, and the reason that I'm not fully invested in it, is that we've had interactions between these characters, and I don't believe that we're seeing them just... I mean, I don't believe that Akecheta sees William as just a giant talking vulture. You know what I mean? But, I mean, the symbolism is there. I just don't know what it means yet.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think the symbolism is there, but I don't think we know exactly what it is. My wondering has been whether or not these are connected to individual people, but whether they might be slightly different way around. So I thought you get the greyhound as being symbolically Ford, obviously. So when Bernard goes into the cradle, then he sees that, and that is symbolically connected into him. I felt that the horse seemed to be a lot more connected to Akecheta. He sees that and he follows that. And that sort of leads him to where he's wanting to go. I always wondered whether the wolf was somehow Arnold in spirit. This was somebody who's sort of passing through there, and so there was a connection with what was happening with the first massacre, with what was happening with the second massacre. So that was where I was coming at and seeing it as just a lot more symbolic rather than a literal, they are sort of seeing somebody. I think it was more a symbolic, letting us understand what was going on. That's my take on it. Justin, did you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the symbolism with like Akecheta is stronger because, again, like just that culture in general, like it's actually been, I just watched a lecture about how Native Americans, and they actually did speak about the Lakotas and other indigenous, people are, a lot of people believe that they were far more evolved as far as finding like spirituality or whatever you want to call it, like trying to understand themselves and understanding the world around them, whether they came to whatever you conclude to be the right answer for, what is God and what, you should worship is, obviously subjective. I'm not saying that they're right, but I'm saying it just makes sense because, like Akecheta would definitely be more attached to his horse than even a host living in town because, the Lakota don't outsource anything. They do everything themselves. You know, like they don't go on a train to get somewhere. They don't like outsource anything outside of their community. Everything is done within their people. So like they become far more resourceful, far more self-reliant, and far more just not looking for anybody else to do anything to them. And again, if you're living off the land, by the definition in Westworld of what the land is, by like Ford said, is everything is code. So he's living off the code. That, I mean, whether he's probably not thinking that way, but he's literally more in sync with the code of this world. So his horse would definitely have a stronger bond with him. And again, he was alive, or not taken in for 10 years, so he never went away, and he had that horse. So that was just, it's the more time you spend, the farther along you go. Again, I like the symbolism. I always took the wolf because it seems to turn up with when the man in black is there, is like impending, like, he kind of is always wishing to give the host a chance. And it's kind of like, for me, I took it as the predator's coming. The predator that you're wishing for, the worthy adversary, is coming, in that, because a wolf is a predator, and it's looking him up and down, and it passes him, meaning that, you're going to get your wish. And I don't think it's going to be exactly how you thought it was going to turn out, evidently. But, I like those theories. But again, I've seen that theory jumbled up a lot of different ways. But that's the fun of theories. That's why I like faceless men theories. They're always right.
That's why I hate faceless men theories, because they're always wrong, is my general view. Kate, I think we'll that by the way, I found fascinating discussion. I wonder whether this is another one of those things that, like with the symbols in the park, where later on we will discover what is going on, and that might even be in a season or two's time, because they just drop this in, and it's not just something in the background. There was a moment in this season when there was this, like, the wolf and the man in black were staring at each other, and that was bringing our attention to what it was, to the fact that there was that wolf there, which obviously harked back to the previous time we'd seen that, when the wolf was going through the previous massacre, the one with Dolores and Arnold. So I do wonder whether we will learn about this at some point in the future, but we don't have the information at hand just yet. Let's start thinking about, and actually no, there was one. So somebody in the chat asked the question I've seen quite a few times, which is, when we're still talking about the animals, why is it that Logan's horse died? I think the answer to this, if it was a host, the answer to this is that the host animals are made to act as realistic as possible. So it died in the same way that a host dies when they get shot in the stomach. They're not actually dead. To be dead, a host, you need to be completely wiped, to have your control unit wiped. That's what the dead bit means for hosts. But their programming is, a human shot in the belly, losing a lot of blood, would die. Therefore, they fall over and go all prone. And the same principle applies to a horse, which is ridden through the desert, doesn't have enough water. It will go through, they'll think that logical processes saying at this point the horse would die, therefore the host horse would die. It's not actually dead. Its brain control unit is still there, but it is doing what it should do according to its program. So I hope that kind of clears up the why did Logan's horse die question.
Doesn't want to break immersion. If your horse can live forever, then you're not providing immersion.
Exactly. Let's move on to the next episode, because we had, so this last episode 8 was very much a let's look at things from a slightly different angle, and the main plot wasn't progressed very far. But this one, again, I think it looks like we've seen the trailer, obviously, and again it looks like it's coming from a specific angle, but it does look like we're going to be moving the plot on quite a lot. Hax, you said you would be happy to briefly explain what we saw in the trailer, and then there was something you particularly wanted to highlight in there.
Certainly. So what we kind of see is, I believe this episode is going to be fully around William and kind of giving the backstory, in in between events and kind of leading, or what led to his wife's death. I think that's really all it comes down to. What we see is a few shots of, him at a party, which I believe is probably going to be taken as, some kind of big event celebrating the park, which the scene in which we see Ford slide the key across, I think might actually be in this scene. But still to be determined, it could be two separate events. We also have a clip of, let me see here. We also have a clip of Dolores and Akita's forces kind of meeting and her shooting. We also have a clip of William shooting as the Man in Black, and finally Bernard holding a gun are the big takeaways. Also Teddy kind of being brought back to life and animated, probably analyzed after being pulled from the water.
Sure, and there was something you're particularly wanting to raise in terms of next episode.
Certainly. So the idea and what's talked about in this episode or in this trailer is tell me one true thing. Tell me something true. Tell me one true thing. And this kind of wraps back around to William's entire character. So when he leaves the park, he leaves the park all those years ago with the intent to overthrow Logan, take his position, really establish himself as what we know to be the Man in Black. So through that interaction, a lot has to happen. He kind of has to, put a facade on and go back to not being what he learned to be in the park. He has to keep on a nice face and really just hide who he truly is now from the rest of the world, because going into Westworld and then being in this mindset, being changed to a black hat, that does something. We don't know the extent of the psychiatric care, but we do know that they have an incubation period after the park because they stressed that this could happen. So what if it doesn't work? What if he leaves the park and still has these urges and still has, this mentality? It helps him because he can use this to build as a businessman and take over, what happens. But Logan isn't just going to accept this. It's not going to be just him out of the picture. I discredit him and he just, does drugs until he dies. It's not going to be that. My point is the stain in which they talk about is William's inner self, the idea that his wife knows who his true colors are and knows that he's really a bad person, maybe hinting that Logan tried to, display who William really was to everyone, to his wife, to Delos, because him not being in the family would make him not a contender for the family business, so to speak. So what if Logan tried to get him out of this position, tried to fight for his job, and tried to really maybe save his family because he genuinely saw William was a bad guy, and through this, maybe Logan's OD wasn't just as drug induced as we're told. Maybe William had something to do with this. So the reason that Juliet kills herself all those years later is because she learns that William was kind of playing the entire family, playing the idea of the good guy and really a bad guy this entire time. And because Logan threatened his position, he got rid of Logan, and thus years down, when everything comes to light, the wife realizes that she was manipulated this entire time, led to the death of her brother, and then thus such regret making her kill herself. That's my overall theory on it. I think it's definitely possible. They could take it a couple different ways, but I think that could happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Justin, did you have any overall takes on this?
Yeah, well, and I don't know if you want me to get into the title thing yet, but I definitely think that what we are seeing is a key card being passed to William, and I tend to believe, whether it's another cradle or not, there's been a lot of speculation on the internets here that Space 47 is where we saw Arnold and Dolores leave. It was written in Mandarin on the sign. That's one of their other facilities that's listed on everybody's favorite source, Wikipedia, but as something that's owned by Delos, and that there's a another cradle, but it's for the human minds that they're mapping per se. Whether that is true or not, and there's the theory that I guess there's a Power Rangers episode named Space 47, and ironically, it delves into the exchanging of consciousness into hosts. I didn't know Power Rangers was that progressive and ahead of its time. I don't really take that as a theory. I take that as, did Jonathan Nolan or anybody on the show want to, throw an ode to Power Rangers or an Easter egg for him that doesn't really do anything? It's kind of a weird coincidence, but yeah, I wouldn't read too much into it, and I hope they didn't do that. That's, then I have to start to think that I have to watch the Power Rangers to predict what's going to happen. But I believe that what we're seeing is, because it has been brought up in the first season, in the terms conditions, actually even before the show was released, that, like these VR simulations, they have the ability to simulate situations, whether it's in a cradle or not. You have to actually check all your VR and simulation devices before you go into Westworld. And you hear people talking about that weird text says, "Oh, I got a hot date with, like a redhead in a pod or something." You know what I mean? So it's possible. What I think we're seeing is William going back to the final night that he talked with his wife, and him trying to figure out if there's any way he could have stopped it. If there's anything he could have said, maybe if he was more honest with her, more open. I think, I don't know, from a storytelling sense, I kind of like that, because, if Emily saw that would change her perspective on her father, that he's been in this park this whole time. Again, how it kind of changed it with James Delos earlier this season. We're like, okay, well, now he's not as much of a son of a bitch. And now if she sees this, she's like, okay, well, he's been here the whole time because he's just trying to figure out why mom left, why mom did what she did. And and it's kind of a far stretch, but I think we're seeing a simulation. I think that Ford, it telling him literally he has to look back. I think he has to come to terms with what happened, because look at how he reacted to this. He went into the park and wanted to see if he was a bad person. But again, I've said this before, not trying to repeat myself, but if you're trying to see if you're a bad person, and your method of choice is, I'll go kill a little girl and her mother, and that'll tell me, you foregone conclusion. You're already, you're a crazy, you're a bad person. It's not the method to figure it out. But I think that it would be a good emotional moment to see him, because he says that you're the only person that sees this stain in me and all this. Maybe just over and over again, trying to relive the situation to see if there could have been any other outcome. Maybe either to clear himself of guilt, or just to maybe better understand it. As me personally, I understand that if I lost somebody I loved and it was maybe after a fight, I would want to relive that moment and just try to see, because it would haunt you, whether or not it was just something I could have prevented or not. That's my theory on the whole, William for this episode. So I don't know. It's probably not right. I just like it, but I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. And I do have thoughts on the title, but I'll let you dictate when that happens.
Let's come to the title in just a second, Justin. So my take on this, as the other guys have said, this is a main focus here on this is going to be the Man in Black, and I think we're going to see the backstory of him completed. Now, what we know already is that the death of his wife hugely impacted on him. We know that he had this sort of wonderful side that he showed to the world, of this wonderfully benevolent person who sets up lots of trusts and foundations and helps people, but he had a dark side, and the only person who really saw through that, and I think it's an excellent point about Logan, by the way, but the only person that he says who saw through that was his wife. And so I think that probably cut him quite deeply, that she did see that. But when she died, that was the moment that sent him into this spiral. So he'd been going on this downward trajectory, and I think that he is now in the current time frame doing the sort of going back up, reassessing what happened in the past and what he was doing. And it's often overlooked, but at some point, a few days before the massacre, he changed his mind about the Delos research project. It almost felt like a throwaway thing at the time, but it was absolutely fundamental in terms of his own character development. This thing that he'd dreamt up, that thrown probably billions upon billions of dollars at over decades to try and achieve this aim of immortality, he thought that they were very nearly done, but he decided no, it was not right. And for me, that was the first moment of seeing that he's gone down to the bottom and he's starting to come back up. So what we're seeing in the current timeline is this him coming back up, or if not becoming a good person again, then at least seeing that what he did in the past was wrong and trying to put that right in some way. So that's what's going on there. I think I saw a couple of people in the chat talking about what Emily's end game here is in this, and so perhaps we will also see a little bit of that. Some speculation that perhaps she might be saying he doesn't deserve to die, therefore actually make him be in this this situation of being a host-human hybrid, so he effectively lives forever when he clearly doesn't seem to want to live forever right now. I think that's a really interesting possibility. I think the other possibility is that she still thinks that he is trying to do this thing. She doesn't know about his change of heart. I think it's entirely likely that she doesn't know about his change of heart. So she thinks that the way to really hurt him is by destroying the thing that he's been building all this time, which actually is probably what he's trying to do as well. So maybe they'll end up that they're on the same side. But Justin, you were wanting to talk about Vanishing Point. I'll give my, which is the title, incidentally, of episode 9, Vanishing Point. I'll give my take on that just very briefly, and then I know you had another thought on it. So Vanishing Point is when you're looking at a picture, for example, the classic example is if you have two train lines as they're going further and further into distance, the vanishing point is the point at which those parallel lines appear to meet. And so I am interpreting this as the two lines of thematically of younger William and his descent, and older William and his redemptive arc, or at least slightly sorry about his past arc. But you had another layer of meaning to this you wanted to share.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I totally am with you on that. I think that's definitely part of it. It clicked in my head the other day, and I am not somebody that can draw at all, but I am really into history, especially the Renaissance. And when I heard Vanishing Point, I was aware because of an amateur architect at the time, Filippo Brunelleschi, who built the Santa Maria del Flora. That was the big cathedral in Florence that was never able to, for a long time, have a dome on it because it couldn't support its own weight. And I wouldn't be going down any rabbit holes if it wasn't for last season. Ford in the show used Renaissance art, Michelangelo, creation of Adam, to explain away the spark of intelligence doesn't come from the divine; it comes from within. It comes from intellect. So I found that very interesting, and I thought, okay, so this is near the end, right around the same time. It wouldn't surprise me for them to do something very similar. It would stick in theme. It'd be, I mean, we see Ford doesn't do anything without style. He doesn't just do basic bitch whiteboard presentation, keynote presentations. He goes all out. So I thought about this, and I thought about the possible connection. I think I'm just going to make the prediction that we will see Brunelleschi being, referenced in showing, because what he did is linear perspective has two elements in it. And one of the main elements is Vanishing Point, which is the title of our episode. Now that does mean where the two parallel lines meet, and the eye is always drawn to it, and it does. It's called the line of extinction. It's called the I think it's a line of extinction, and the something else, one other, like the escape or whatever. So he utilized the idea of, we don't need to build something that is what it looks like, because I started thinking about the theme of this season. It is still about what's going on inside the host's mind, but it's more so about the worlds. This whole door, they're talking about leaving whatever world Westworld is in and going to another world. Brunelleschi managed to build the dome that nobody could build because he built an inner dome within the dome. It had never been done before. So on the outside, it was perceived as this great dome they always wanted it, because he thought, well, we don't have to do, what everybody says we can't. We just have to, change the way they look at how we do it, and look at what they see. He changed, they adapted Brunelleschi's linear perspective into everything from social science to even marketing, to just change perception. You don't need to change the product. You change the perception. And I think this fits with this season. We are going to have to explain, how we go from one world to another. Obviously, we've been dealing with a lot of simulations, like Hax's great deal with the cradle and all that. So this dome within a dome, giving the perception of something grand, without the actual seeing the reality of it, is very interesting to me. And I just made the connection that it's probably a high possibility that they would, if they're going to reference any art, that, that would be it. Because it really did change the game, and it is involved. The whole thing about linear perspective is creating a realistic environment, in a 2D world on paper. So it is actually utilized in artificial intelligence and also simulations. So the dome within the dome could be a metaphor for, whatever Westworld is in, and also the cradle and anything else they might come with. So I just thought it was, really interesting. And I always like when they inject art into it.
Yeah, I like that. So, Robert, something you brought up earlier about season 3 possibly being them in the outside world. I've been kind of stuck on this idea that we may never see the current outside world. How does that exist? How does that play character wise? I mean, do we just assume that we now have to track all different storylines going into the outside world, doing different things? Is like some, crazy futuristic, now they're like army soldiers trying to take over the world, or, do they band together and then interpersonal conflict that way? I realistically cannot see the show outside of the park, and that got me thinking that maybe we never see it. Like, I don't know how to picture that. I don't know how to develop that in my head about what we would see, or who their target would be, or what the drama would be. So, what do you think of that?
I am of the view that, well, I take as my starting point what the showrunners, Lisa Joy, Jonah Nolan, have said about each season, which is that they see it as effectively like a camera panning out. So each season we see more and more and more. And I think that's not just understanding more about what's going on, although that is definitely the case. I think that's also a very physical thing. So season 1 was entirely within Westworld. Yes, there were sort of like flashbacks and hints and all the rest of it, but season 1, pretty much we did not move more than a few miles from where we started in there. It was all about what was happening in that one thing. This time we pulled out a little bit. We've seen a little bit of 2 of the other parks. We've seen a little bit of the outside world in older time frames. So I think season 3 is going to pull back a little bit more, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of the outside world. I find it harder to see a bigger story being played out still in the same small area. And I think that all of the messaging we've had right from episode 1 of season 2 is that this is about getting out into the outside world. This is what Dolores's big plan was. This is what Ghost Nation's big plan has been. This was what the foreshadowing with the conversations we had right at the very first moments of season 2 was about. This image of Bernard was saying, I have this dream of me being on the other, and you're on the other side of the ocean. So I think all of this hints to the end of this season. We're going to see Dolores and some others heading out into the bigger world, and I think that into the real world. So I think that opens up a huge amount of story potential, because what happens when they are completely free? They're free from not just the direct control through the mesh network or the cradle or anything like that, but also, can they survive? Do they want to survive unnoticed? How do each of the individual hosts take that next step? Are they wanting people to know that they're hosts? Are they trying to hide that they're hosts? Are they wanting to take on the humans? Are they recognizing that that not all humans are the same as the guests who came into the park? I think there's a lot of questions that they can explore there. So I think there is a lot of potential for season 3 and beyond, starting to go to the outside world.
Well, what if so check this out. So what if, the idea of the greyhound chasing after the rabbit, and then finally once they get the rabbit, has nothing to do with it. So they get to the outside world, and I feel like them getting to the outside world is such a catch the rabbit moment. It's the end game. It's the thing that signifies that they're free. Now, you could definitely take into consideration that they need to develop, Delos would definitely be coming after them, and they would need to take down this higher entity, and drama exists in that. But the fact that we haven't seen the real world in this present timeline, we've seen it when they were younger. We've seen it when, James Delos existed, but we haven't seen it yet in the present. So I think there's something that they're hinting at. And to come back to this entire season and some of the oddities that it's had, what if realistically this entire season was Ford? And I know I have an obsession with the simulator. What if Ford was running, these storylines through the simulator, and what we're seeing is the possibility of how they would need to get out, and maybe it does end with the pan back to the beach and it goes to a lower aspect ratio. I feel like if they get out of the park, then we have nothing to do, because I just don't see like this, Detroit Become Human video game happening. I don't see them trying to convince masses that they're real people, or, it goes back to when Ford says, "What do you expect would happen? A big ticket tape parade in your honor." No, they would hunt them. They would, pursue them. So if they get to the outside world, and that has to happen. And maybe it's all hearsay. It could go either way. I truly believe that, but it's interesting.
It is interesting. I personally find it harder to conceptualize the next 3 seasons just being focused in on that island, because once we get to what happens with this data, the Abernathy's brain unit, then once that's gone, there's absolutely nothing stopping Delos just wiping that place out, because they do appear to be hugely powerful. They appear to be holding them back simply because they're trying to protect their research. So I think that it would be a lot harder for me to imagine all of the hosts having tried to escape and then going, actually, you know what, either not being able to make it or turning back. That does not work for me as a concept for season 3. I want and I expect season 3 to be bigger in not just its scale, but also its ambition. And I think the ambition is not just here's a robot rebellion. The ambition is here is a new species. How do they interact and interrelate with humanity? And I think that is a bigger philosophical theme for them to be exploring in later seasons, because at the moment this is still individual hosts and what they are doing, but it's once we get a whole nation out there interrelating that we actually then start getting a whole new load of ideas coming through.
Yeah, because
I think so.
Yeah, because I think you're absolutely both right. Since they wouldn't have done this revolution so quickly if this was their end game, obviously. The pacing wouldn't be correct. I think that we're going to face modern themes in issues that they've been addressing. I think automation, like a big concern now, is what if we have all these cars that can drive themselves? That's over 1 million jobs in one day that could be gone. So how, being free from an artificial boundary, is not really being free. They just are not restricted in where they can physically, move to. So being free would be them, being self-reliant and being able to sustain a lifestyle and build their own culture outside of this. So we have to for us to say how they can interact with the rest of the world, we have to know what the hell the rest of the world is. I think that we will end this season with getting a glimpse of it, so we can start theorizing about that. Because I mean, like they might not address automation if it's like a vacant planet, like it's like a Mars-esque situation. You know what I mean? So like, what are going to be the struggles? And I have the crackpot theory that they might take some of these. I do believe that there's a lot of familiar human faces that we've seen that are in a cold storage-esque, I don't want to meet in the middle on this one, Hax. We talk about this after show, you know what I mean? Like facility where they're storing them in because they have to bring people with them that have, let's just say, social security numbers or something, and able to mix in the whole third party about who are they talking to outside of here, how much clout do they have in the real world, and what's the possibility of there already being some hosts that are outside of the world and it might not be too happy with them coming out. I think that the issues they face once they get into the world are just as interesting as the ones that they had to go through to get out of the world. Because it's, again, I think you perfectly put, it's catching the hair. Now, what do? You don't have any plans. They're not going to dental school. Only Elsie is doing that. So it's not about how you get there. It's about what you do. And that's always kind of been my only problem with this show. Is the whole first season was all about achieving the sentience. And I feel like the one thing they could have done better was to even Galactica, which Joy, is a part of it, has done a better job with this. I just started watching some of it with the biggest, themes I see in that show is what they do once they, have their abilities to make their own choices. I don't care so much about whatever rigid, structure they figure out for, getting sentience. I care about what do people do once they can make their own decisions. So I guess this would be all at once. What do you do once you can make your own decisions and you're no longer restricted by these artificial boundaries or something like that? But we don't know what the real world looks like. But that's it.
Yeah, I think I would agree, and I think that the way that the showrunners described it was that season 1 was like a prequel, and I would agree with you completely, Justin. It's this was the how did they achieve their self-awareness, their sentience, and then seasons 2 onwards are what do they do with it once they've got it. I think I could talk about this, what might happen in season 3 and beyond, for quite a long time, but I'm just aware of the time, guys. So we're going to do maybe 5 or 10 more minutes. So if you've got any more final questions, now is your chance to drop them in the chat. And just while we're talking about it, Karen McDonald, thank you so much for the super chat. That's really appreciated. It's very kind. Just saying great chat, and you just wanting to thank us. You're very welcome. My last very quick thought on that one is that I'm still holding by the idea that the last shot or the last scene of this season is going to be Dolores and co coming out into the real world. I think that would be a really strong way to end the season. But just on the trailer, Hax, you were mentioning there are a couple of other things that it's not all going to be about the Man in Black. There are a couple of other things we saw going on there. One of them was Maeve. Now, we saw a shot of Maeve, obviously, where we left her. She was there, sort of at the mercy of Charlotte Hale, because she's down there, clearly not very well, but also having got huge new extension of powers or learning how to use her powers better. I just want to put this thought that, and we were discussing this before, the three of us, before we went live, is there was that scene from the first trailer, from the Super Bowl trailer, of Maeve coming through with a whole load of bulls. And I do wonder whether now she has the ability to be able to control other hosts that she can't see, whether she can actually be controlling whatever hosts happen to be hanging around in the Mesa hub and use that as her way to get out, including bulls and possibly also including Clementine, who looked like she got shot last episode, but again, we see in the trailer for this episode. So perhaps that is Maeve creating her own army to get her out of there. Hax, let's come to you on this one. Any other thoughts on Maeve for this next episode?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much nails it. With the shot of the running of the bulls, she kind of, like, even back in the trailer, she like kind of has this difference about her. Like, it seems like in that shot, if you go back and watch it, it's like a confidence that she has. Now, I don't know if this is like her being reprogrammed to go and do whatever, but she is kind of, manipulating bulls to attack Delos employees. So maybe she doesn't get used as a weapon as Dolores thought she would be. The idea of Ford being in that scene though, and her, so in the trailer, she is laying, her neck is still opened up for whatever reason, and she's looking at Ford. She cries a single tear, and she slowly, just slightly, shakes her head no. So I've been trying to think about what that could be, like what Ford could be asking her that she is just torn apart about, that she refuses or she doesn't want to do. Have you guys thought about that? And Justin, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First off, her neck is open for a reason. Hax, I got this as a tech guy. It's because they wrote it in the script. So that's the way it is. No, yeah, it makes no sense. It's for you guys to watch the after show. We went over it trying to figure it out. I'm like, yeah, there's no damn reason. That guy's just Delos QA has shown no ability to succeed at anything, and it's been kind of a bad showing of that whole narrative, because you're always supposed to show, not tell. Every single team says they're the best, and they never ever succeeded even one task. They should have had them do something good. They all have been utterly incompetent. I won't go on a rant, but I think that we should look at this. I think what Ford is probably asking her is to do what we see her doing. Because what has Maeve not wanted to do? Control others. She's been trying not to. I think he's asking her, and he's probably like, I'm being kind of nice asking because I could just jump in the car and take the keys, ask Bernard. But that you need to manipulate these situations. And talking about manipulating situations, if everything there is code and she have a lot of these Neo-esque qualities, she might be able to not only just control the animals, and hey, you might like this if it is a simulation that they're in, because it doesn't have to be a simulation within the simulation. But like I said, with the shells and all that, we don't know exactly how this Westworld operates, the facility. The weather is obviously controlled to a high degree and all that. She might be able to manipulate the very, every little aspect of everything from nature to the way the animals, not only behave, but like how they look, everything. If you can truly manipulate code, and it looks like she's getting to that point, she could literally defy the laws of physics. You know what I mean? So I think that he's asking her to be very controlling of her people, because again, I think it's one of those questions of, what does this justify? Does the ends justify the means? Or the means justify the end? Is it worth doing this if all these people get to be free, but you have to go against what your core beliefs are? So, but I think it's very interesting that we see him talking to her. And again, how is he talking to her? Since he's inside of Bernard and the cradle is gone, it doesn't seem to be a flashback unless she's had that crude operation done a million times. But yeah, I think this episode's going to be, I'm predicting it's going to be great. So, and I'm usually wrong, so hopefully I don't screw everybody and have a shitty episode for it. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. We hopefully will get a nice setup for this finale.
Yeah, I agreed. And I think that the other things that I would point out, and guys, if you wanted to have a quick check if there's anything in the chat that would be useful for us to pick up on, there is a shot of Dolores and the confrontation, as Hax was mentioning earlier, with the Ghost Nation. Now, that appears to be, this is something which I don't know if one of you guys has got a really good answer to this one, but that appears to be the same thing that we saw in from the other side right back in episode 1. If you remember, when they're on the beach in the 2 weeks later timeline, and they open up the Ghost Nation guy's head and they have a look at his memories, and we see Dolores come in and kill him. And this appears to be that same scene from the other perspective, from seeing it from Dolores's perspective. But the timelines don't seem to quite add up on that one, because, and I can't remember the exact timing they said, but I think they said it was something like 12 days ago, whereas we are also told that this was this was 2 weeks later. So I'm not quite sure whether exactly how that ties together, but it's very clear that we're going to have the Ghost Nation and Dolores with going to the same place but wanting different things, or having very different approaches as to how to get there. The other thing is this looking at Teddy and analyzing Teddy. This does appear to be in the 2 weeks later timeline, the dead Teddy, the wiped Teddy, trying to figure out what on earth is going on there. Guys, are there any do either of you want to either pick up on either of those points, or are there any questions in the chat you think we should be picking up on quickly just to end with?
Yeah, I think the idea that the Ghost Nation host was shot, I believe it was 11 days and 9 hours ago. So 11 days, 9 hours ago, this host was shot, and we haven't seen it shot yet. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely important, and it could be taken a couple different ways, but I think it's just something to note for. I don't know if I have really any defining theory about why this time seems a little funky, but I will say watch for it in the upcoming episodes. Maybe in particular, watch for that host, and if you see that host, then maybe it fits everything together well.
Cool. I just want one thing. Justin appears to have dropped off for a moment. Maybe it was a thunderstorm has got him. Lauren's Corner is asking whether the water scene where everyone is drowned is a take on Moses parting the Red Sea and drowning his oppressors but freeing others. Yeah, I think that this is part of the religious imagery we've had going on there. Akecheta's very much in this kind of mold of the person who's going to lead his people through the waters to the other side. So he's taking on very much that kind of role. So yeah, I think there's certainly an homage there. And I saw one other thing in the chat about Strand and the curious fact that when we had that episode with James Delos, when he was doing his dancing, he was dancing to Do the Strand. Is there a link here across Hax? Maybe just quickly answer this one. If you have any thoughts on it, is there a link between that and the character Strand that we have had introduced this season?
Oh God, I hope not. I've thought about this, and I've listened to the song individually, and just I don't know. I don't see it. I don't know how it relates, but it is interesting. The show creators do go out of their way to kind of insert red herrings to make sure that nothing is too open or too obvious to the audience who now dissects every frame of the show. So I think maybe it's just something interesting they put in for that reason.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. And it looks like we've got Justin back. We were just about to wrap up, actually, Justin. So perhaps if you've got any other final thoughts about next episode, and then if you want to tell people where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, sorry, it was the weather. The storm stopped, so the internet thought it stopped too. That makes sense. My life's going good this week. But anyways, thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Hax. Of course, after the show tonight, 10:30, before the dust settles, me, Hax, and Axel Foley from Westworld Theorycast, and the Game of Thrones stream 5 p.m. Eastern time this following Friday with Robert and Kev from Bridge 4, where we will be talking about the differences between the Knights of the South and the Northern Lords, and talking about how their values change and even the way they fight might change, and how George portrays different warrior classes, and how D&D portray how he portrays it, and so on. So I can't be more excited for that. Thank you, Robert, for coming on for that. And yeah, just look out for content. Make sure to support me at the Justin Thomas Show. And thank you guys so much for coming, and everybody that showed concern for my swollen face. And I hope I could convey my thoughts as clear as possible in my state right now. So it's always a good time to be on. Thank you, guys.
And Hax, where can people find you on the internet?
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you do like more Westworld content, explained videos, and theory crafting overall, as well as other shows as we move into the off season, you can find me at Hax Dogma on YouTube or Twitter, and any video will have my Discord linked below. And yeah, just hang out and come chat with us.
Fantastic. And guys, just to reiterate, if you're interested, if you come here for Westworld content, you think you might be interested in my Game of Thrones content, please do check out the rest of my channel. I do Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire content several a week, so please do go and have a look for that. If you're at all interested in supporting the channel, either just supporting it or getting access to some exclusive content, then please do go and have a check out of my page over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/InDeepGeek, and keep an eye out for my new channel, The Well Told Tale, coming very soon. Guys, I want to thank you. This has been a really good chat. Thanks to Hax and thanks to Justin. The questions we've had over in the chat today have been excellent. Sorry we didn't get a chance to answer all of them. Particular thanks to the super chats. That's incredibly generous of you. But guys, enjoy the episode. I think it's going to be a really good one. Again, this season, the last few episodes have just been ramping up as far as I'm concerned. I think they've been doing an excellent job. But so enjoy it, and I will see you on the other side. Take care, everyone. See you soon.